this to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly grew into business.
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty
We
mind-boggling.
can't just believe that it was the work of these lone troubled individuals.
It's episode 250,
It is.
and Rob's here.
And I'm here, and it's been an emotional day. I'm glad to end it with this.
Yes.
Glad to be here with you guys. This is going to be fun.
Rob is making some life changes.
I am.
He's,
I quit my job today and started a new job. It's
yeah.
terrifying and exciting.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Change
Yeah.
is good.
Congratulations, man. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your Conspirinormal brothers are here for you, man.
And we got Seraphiel here. He's off of producing duties tonight. He can
Yes.
just sit back and
I can drink
back and
Rob
get drunk.
Scotch and chill the hell out.
I got to drive him home, so I can't get drunk, unfortunately. But so we got an all-star cast, guys. I'm really excited for this roundtable. First up, we've got guest we had on last year, Richard Hatem, who graciously agreed to come on. I'm really excited to have you, Richard. Welcome back to the show.
I'm excited to be back. I'm honored to be back on the 250th episode. That's amazing.
Yeah.
In all my years of working in TV, I haven't gotten near 250 episodes of anything.
You got to start doing a podcast.
God, that's right, man. Maybe.
Yeah, I think you could do it. I really do. You come up with just talk about weird stuff all the time. I mean, it's becoming a lucrative thing these days.
I think if I started a podcast, my wife would kill.
You think so?
Yeah, I think that would be the end of everything.
Yeah, I think we're all. I think both me and Adam are single. So yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah. And we've got Timothy Renner.
Hello.
The
250, halfway to 500.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we'll see if we can get there. That's a whole other. It's taken me 7 years to get to this, so we'll take another 7.
We can do it in 5, I'll bet.
You think we could do it in 5?
Yeah. That's 2
Okay.
weeks off a year for the next 5 years.
Oh yeah, episode 500.
Podcasting in 5 years, it'll probably be some kind of like a plug-in sensory experience when people.
Yeah, it'll be all VR for sure.
Those
They'll get
AI
to be
robots
Adam.
from the
They'll
future.
get to sit on the couch.
You get to drink my scotch too when you're listening.
And Wren Collier is here,
Hey, everyone.
and Joshua Cutchin, last but not least.
Feels like just 50 episodes ago that I was at your place, out of my mind.
Playing the tuba.
That was a fun night.
I barely remember that part.
Well, that was just a little over a year ago, man.
Yeah, yep.
So, I mean, and congratulations, Josh, in case anybody doesn't know out there in the audience that Josh is now a daddy 2 times over.
Yeah,
2 for the price of 1.
Yeah, this is my first appearance since they've been ushered onto the mortal coil. So it's interesting doing some juggling, but I've got some really good support relatives here that are helping me helping facilitate this. So make the best of it, guys.
When was the last time
And
you
I can
slept?
tell you for sure they do not give you 2 for the price of 1 in the hospital. You're paying for both.
Oh man, yeah.
All right, so I wanted to start this out with an article that I want to read, and I thought this was interesting. I actually telling you guys before, I pulled this off of the Astonishing Legends Facebook group and shared it over to Tim over at Strange Familiars Facebook group as well. I have some doubts about this. This is from a Reddit posting. So who knows the truth, the veracity of this? All we know is that it was just put there. And this is about a near-death experience, which I want to kind of get into a little bit of that topic with you guys, but I'm going to read this and then we'll go from there. So this is called, After Living 10 Years of a Happy Life, Man Wakes Up and Realizes He Was Unconscious and Dreamt It All. One of the most daunting experiences a human can endure is being close to dying. While some escape the claws of death without experiencing any changes in them, others come back just not the same. There are many theories trying to explain what happens to us when we are dying. However, there is no definite answer. Yet many people candidly share what they felt during their near-death experiences and what effect they had on them. When somebody created a thread on Reddit asking, have you ever felt a deep personal connection to a person you met in a dream, only to wake up feeling terrible because you realized they never existed? One user found a perfect place to share his chilling experience. He said that his near-death experience was so strange that it took him 3 years to recover. So here's the actual experience. Throwaway account because this is really personal. My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note, he was 325 pounds. I was 120 pounds. While unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately she bore me a daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house when my daughter was 2. She, my wife, bore me a son. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him and my daughter. One day while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I wasn't eating or drinking. I stared at the lamp for 3 days before my wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time, my cognizance was breaking up and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp is not real. The house is not real. My wife, my kids, none of that is real. The last 10 years of my life are not real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and became aware of pain, a shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth," and opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know, lost or freaking out. I was completely confused. At some point, a cop scoots me up, walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop, since he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive, and given CT scans. I went through about 3 years of hard depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says. Edit. 24 hours after post, never thought anyone would read this. I changed the line so it no longer seems that my 2-year-old daughter bore a child. I have never seen Inception or the Star Trek episode so many have mentioned, but I will eventually. I will not do an AMA. I've had many PMs describing similar experiences in 3 posters. Stating such experiences are impossible. I'd say more research needs to be done on brain functions. Pre-med students don't assume you know everything. If you have asked if they can write a book, screenplay, stage play, rage comic, etc., please consider this tale open source and have fun with it. All right.
That's terrifying. First of all, it's just, oh my God, that could be chills.
Yeah.
That is really incredible and really fantastic, and it's not the first time I've heard it. The only thing I've heard that is sort of close to that, and I can't recall the book that I read it in, but it was a book about near-death experiences, and it was about a person whose father had had surgery and came through the surgery, even though at one point it looked like he had flatlined, but then he came back and was fine. But he came back and his personality was a little bit different, a bit more somber. He was a bit more withdrawn, and years and years later, when this guy's dad, the guy who had the surgery, was nearing death, he asked him about that surgery, about the last time he was in the hospital, and he said, you never seemed quite the same after that surgery. And his dad said, well, what I've never told anyone is that I had a near-death experience during surgery that day. And his son asked what happened, and he said, well, I had a life review, and yeah, I've heard about the life review. I had one, except I literally relived my entire life. I lived 50 years, minute to minute, the equivalent of 1 minute to 1 minute. I lived my entire life over again and experienced it from the perspective of everyone in it. So it's sort of a mixture of both. It's a life review as experienced and talked about in typical near-death experiences, and yet the temporality of it was experienced in such a dramatically different way. And most people who have near-death experiences, they go on longer than the amount of time, obviously, that they are maybe technically dead. But this sense that you live for years and years and years and you experience it that way makes a lot of sense to me. Do you guys, when you dream, like when you're watching TV and you nod off for a second, and then you wake up and you realize that only like a couple of minutes of the TV show has gone past, but it feels like you've been asleep for a long time? Have you guys had that?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's possible. I think it's very, very possible to experience time in a very different way. I mean, even from the little bit we get from dreams.
Yeah, I've only ever had something like this happen once to me, where when I was in high school, I had a dream that seemed like it lasted about 3 weeks in real time, where I was living as like a nomad in the desert. It was almost like another life or something. Like I was part of a camel crew that was like traveling through the desert, like a caravan. And we would stop and make camp at night and like have fires and cook dinner and go to sleep and do the same thing the next day. And it seemed like it lasted about 3 weeks before I woke up, and it was like the next morning and I went to school. Nothing like this guy having 10 years, but
yeah.
Was in your dream, was your experience of that time, was it, when you think back on the dream, does it compress, or were you like, no, I remember that one morning was slightly different from the previous morning because we were in a different place and we ate different food and the people said different things, or is it less specifically detailed than that?
It's not really specifically detailed. It feels, it's weird because it doesn't feel like dream memory. Because dream memory sort of seems to fade, and when you try to remember things from dreams, they seem kind of off. In this case, it's like normal memory. Like I can't really remember what I had for dinner like 3 weeks ago. It sort of feels like that. Like I remember some of the days, like specifically, I remember walking into this tent and like talking to someone about like whatever Bedouin type stuff we were talking about. But it was like, it was weird because it was almost like I was like living someone else's life for a little while.
That's what I was about to say. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like it was almost like I was riding along for it, even more than living it myself.
It was more passive.
Yeah. It's like, it's really hard to explain because it felt both passive and active at the same time.
Dreams are kind of like that too sometimes, though. You're not, kind of just for the ride.
You feel like an observer and like you're sort of in control to an extent as well.
The other day, because I've been thinking about this a lot, because I've been reading Time Loops by Eric Wargo. Have you guys checked that one out yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I listened to the show he did with Soraya about that.
Okay. Well, so that stuff's been on my mind, and I woke up in the middle of the night, sort of in the middle of a dream, and several different things were sort of happening in the dream. And as I tried to remember just exactly what was happening, for the first time ever, I got the feeling that the events of the dream were sort of all happening at once, and that I was very, very quickly arranging them into a narrative. And this was all something that I realized, like, just as I was waking up, like all those things, like I don't think they were happening in a narrative. I think they were more jumbled, and yet almost instantly I was dividing them up and rearranging them and ordering them in a way that gave them narrative.
It was almost like you were behind the curtain of the dream, I bet.
Yeah,
directing it, even though you're in it.
Yeah, but it's that weird compression of time, mm-hmm. But I also like what you said about sort of being like living the life, but also just sort of observing it, almost like you're watching a movie and you're deeply into somebody else's point of view.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good analogy for how it felt.
Yeah, like the third person. Sometimes I'll have dreams where I'm in the third person, and sometimes where I'm viewing myself. Sometimes I have dreams where I'm in the first person and I'm viewing mm-hmm. everything around me. And I've definitely had dreams where they're so vivid, where I'm sure everybody's had this, where you wake up and it's almost like your reality is still in the dream and reality seems unreal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a strange feeling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you ever have the false awakening kind of thing happen to you, like I've had like 3 or 4 tears of that happen to me in a single dream, and it gets really frustrating.
The only times those have ever happened to me has been multiple tears, which to me is kind of strange. It's never like it just happens once. It's like 2 or 3 times where you wake up, but you're not really awake, and then you wake up again, you're not really awake, and then you finally wake up, and it's like, crap, I gotta go work.
That's just like Inception. Yeah.
I don't get false awakenings. I get false falling asleeps. Like I'll be really tired, and I'll be so tired that I'm really concentrating on getting to sleep, and it'll be like, it'll be 3 a.m. and I'll be like, I'm still haven't fallen asleep. Then I'll be like, wait a minute. When I was trying to get to sleep, I was laying on the floor of an Old West saloon, and there was a peacock. So obviously I fell asleep.
Oh, that's weird. Oh,
I've had a couple of times where I've met someone in a dream that I feel is just like, soulmate, sort of someone that you've known for years. I've never really had that sort of time dilation thing, but
Josh, you're dreaming about me now? Aw.
But the things that I think of, because I believe I've heard quite a few of these sort of stories. I think there was a Mysterious Universe episode a couple of years ago that was dedicated just to all of these sort of stories, and they're not as unexpected, or not as uncommon rather as one would think. But it does make me think about, I think to the time dilation and altered states of consciousness, time dilation in the DMT experience, where it feels like it's been 15,000 years, and it's obviously been 15 minutes because there's still that episode of The Next Generation on TV that you're watching.
And of course, that's what you're watching.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think of, I think people will hear me say this and they'll think that Josh is saying fairyland, but I don't know what fairyland is, but I think that is so tied into this sort of dreamscape, time dilation, supernatural lapse of time in the other world, missing time on UFOs thing. I think this is all part and parcel of the same thing. Tir Nanog in some traditions was actually literally dreamland. And then of course we've got a whole nother set of questions about something that Wren's familiar with, this astral projection idea, and was Wren part of a Bedouin walk-in or what? I think that in some ways, I think that the dream state might be one of the linchpins in figuring all this stuff out.
Yeah, I know during out of body experiences I've had, there's some degree of time dilation. because generally they're sort of dreamlike in that, you can't really tell how much time has passed, and sometimes more time passes than you expect, and sometimes less time passes than you expect. And, I've had the inverse of this happen during sleep paralysis episodes where I have sleep paralysis and I manage to notice the time on the clock. And when I break out of it, it's like an hour later or something. So you have like missing time, but
right.
Again, you're right, Josh. You have all kinds of weird sort of time manipulation going on in these altered states.
You can see, well, I'm not sure if it's still up. You could in the past see an example of this on YouTube. There was someone who was doing salvia, and he's smoking salvia and he's out of his mind, and they're filming him the whole time. And he comes back out of it because when you smoke salvia, it's like 5 minutes or whatever. It's pretty quick, depending on the dosage. And he's coming out of it, and he says to the guy, like, you don't understand. I had a whole other life. And he starts trying to tell me he's still dazed from the salvia. He can't really explain it too well, but that's what happened. Like, he's so like freaked out about it. Like he just had this whole other experience when he was out of his mind on salvia.
Well, I mean, there was a friend of Joe Rogan's who smoked salvia on a podcast and came out of it and said that he had an entire life as like a being, like a mermaid, Some of these, but some of these salvia stories that you hear are really terrifying. Like there are some that are like, I spent 17 years as a piece of luggage underneath a staircase.
The inanimate object stuff is really scary.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
My little brother is still dealing with the sort of after effects of a LSD trip that he had a couple of years ago, where he sort of saw the world start disintegrating around him, and like all of his memories disappearing one by one until he couldn't remember like who I was, and he couldn't remember my face, couldn't remember our dad, and then he said like his very perception of time was like stripped away. And so at least to him subjectively, he felt like he spent an infinite amount of time in this state of just like basically sensory deprivation. And, of course, he's still alive today and he's out of it. But it's odd because he's still trying in a lot of ways to synthesize what that experience meant to him and deal with sort of the after effects of that experience in his life now.
So when he did the LSD, was he in like in a controlled setting, or was this at a party or out in the desert, or what was the circumstance?
I think he was just at a friend's house alone in a room. I think his other friends, they were tripping too, but they were like watching a movie in the den or something. So he ended up just being by himself in like a dark room, and
Wow.
and plus
That's
two,
the
I
only
don't
way
know
to
if
do
it was
it,
actually
man.
LSD because you get sold a lot of things that people claim to be LSD, and you never really know. I know last time I was sold anything like that, it turned out it was just like, Chinese gray market research chemicals, but you never really know these days.
Yay.
Gotta get some good hippie friends, man.
Yeah. He used to go to like sort of music festivals and stuff and get stuff, but that never really been my scene.
Yeah, me neither.
I want to do LSD, but first my wife says I can't do it till I'm 65. because the whole family needs my brain to be functioning for a few more years.
Yeah.
But after reading the Michael Pollan book, I'm like, oh yeah, I really want to try it. But under I'm so afraid because I've never done it before, but I want to do it under, the completely controlled, in the relaxing therapist office with the music playing and, a whole guided thing. But I really want to do it. I want to see what happens.
That's the key. You need to be with people you trust. It's got to be, and you got to trust where it came from, obviously, as, like Wren was saying.
Yeah.
That's what makes LSD hard these days. Like my suggestion would be like mushrooms because you can't really fake mushrooms. I mean, So, but LSD is easy to, get sold something that's not really LSD, but mushrooms, you can look at it. Is it a mushroom? Then it might be what you're looking for.
Does it taste like a chin
Right,
sock?
because it's organic though, like you don't know if you're getting, it's like, not all apples taste the same.
Yeah, there's different strains and different dosages. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's really,
I got a few more years.
It really depends on who you are as a person. If you're a really outgoing person is dependent on that social interaction, I'd recommend other people. But if you've always kind of been a loner, you might really enjoy trips by yourself. You might end up telling the guide to leave you alone. I mean, that's how I was during my time as a psychonaut. But it's just really individual thing, and that's why the hippies thought it's going to make everyone great and everyone's going to get along. But I think it kind of just amplifies who you are to begin with.
Yeah, it really does, and it kind of gives you what you put into it too.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, if they go into it thinking I need a guide or I'm going to have a bad trip, then that's kind of what they'll get out of it. So it kind of gives back what you bring to it.
When I posted this story, guys, to kind of like give a little bit of a skeptical perspective on this, like I mentioned before, we've just got a story that's been dropped on Reddit out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. So you've got pretty much two choices here. You've got the person just wants to be, it's true, and the person just wants to be anonymous, or it's fake, and they want to start a discussion going. And there was, when I posted, I think it was on the Strange Familiars, or it might have been on Where Did the Road Go Facebook group, but someone made a point about one of the lines where it said, at some point, a cop scooped me up, walked me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down in the back of a cop car. So this person that commented said, and she had a good point, was that if someone has a trauma like that, you wait for the EMTs to get there. You don't move someone that's just been hit by somebody that's 200 pounds over their weight, and you especially don't throw them into a cop car. So,
unless it was a campus cop.
I think they should use it by a car.
If it was a campus cop, those guys are.
Yeah. So it could be still true, but if they definitely didn't follow the protocol,
right? And
I thought it was interesting that they also cited that Star Trek: The Next Generation episode, which is the Inner Light, which if you guys, or many of you guys have seen that, but that's the one where Picard gets zapped by this satellite that, and then he lives a whole other life essentially as this alien species that's about to die. He experiences like 40 years or something of another life, but he's still laying there. So that was another reference. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm skeptical about the story, but I think that it can lend a good discussion that maybe reality sometimes isn't what it seems. In the whole Matrix concept of, or an artificial world, basically, there's
an excellent episode of Adventure Time. Adventure Time that deals with this as well. Called Puhoy.
Surprised nobody's brought up Jacob's Ladder.
Jacob's Ladder. I was going to bring that up.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, the story kind of makes me think, just the way it uses certain words, like it kind of smells like a fake story to me, but ultimately it doesn't really matter because there are other people who've had similar or described similar experiences. So it's not like an unprecedented thing that this person is claiming to have experienced. And like you said, if it's getting people talking about it, then that's fine. It doesn't really matter if it's true or not.
I'm sorry, Tim, what were you going to say?
I was just talking about a fantastic episode of the cartoon Adventure Time. It's a very similar thing. The one character goes into a pillow fort and crawls out the other side and experiences a whole other life, and then I forget how he gets back, but he has this whole other life. Very similar story.
Yep.
There's that whole episode of Rick and Morty as well, where they actually play an arcade. Yeah, they play an arcade game in which they live a person's entire life.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I love that show.
So let's switch gears here, Josh.
Yes.
Did you get a chance? I don't know if you got a chance to listen to episode 249. I did just post it today, so if you did not get a chance to listen to it. But
no, I did. I downloaded it right as I walked out the door. And
okay. Excellent.
Yeah. No, I thought so.
Let me
It's funny
because the other guys, haven't heard it. I had Chris Wolford on the last show, and we talked a lot about the TTSA stuff. He has been described by some as the TTSA fanboy. I heard his side of the story. He knows that I somewhat disagree with him. We're cool with that, but I like to have fairness on this show. And it's funny, as I was dropping that in the week between recording it and today, Josh has been getting into it with the rest of with some other people online on like Twitter. So yeah, that's the background to what we're talking about.
So I tend to get along pretty well with Chris.
Yeah.
And he knows
loves
where
you.
I feel. And we're pretty amicable. And because he is not like some of these TTSA people are. Look, if they really feel like there's something that's going to come out of, or has come out of, this whole Tom DeLonge thing, or as John Tenney pointed it out, his name is an anagram for dong omelet. Dude, if he or anybody else thinks that, that's fine. Where my problems are with the TTSA crowd is the us versus them-ism that they keep on promoting. And there's someone who had written an article, and it was basically just this entire article slamming people who aren't buying into the TTSA narrative and how you're going to be left behind because you're all a bunch of dinosaurs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just, smugness and overt self-confidence coupled with vague threats about who's going to be remembered for what they said after disclosure. That doesn't look good on anybody. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
And of course I posted this, and then I had people saying, you're sowing the kind of discontent that you're railing against. And I'm like, no, why aren't you tolerant of my intolerance argument doesn't work here, folks. I'm pointing this out because there are these people who are saying this, and the author jumped in and got into an ad hominem thing where he was posting pictures of children's storybooks on witchcraft and saying that was much more my speed, and just, which I mean, is again sort of displaying his ignorance about the research in sci for the past, several decades, which compared to what TTSA has done to prove anything, I think pales in comparison. I think anybody who's really, fluent in both would have to admit that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I got more receipts in the occult than TTSA has provided. So
I know it's just it just boggles the mind. But like my original post was saying that this TTSA post seemed less about objectively looking at what has happened and more about future promises, more about us versus themism. It read like a political or a religious screed. And so I did a little experiment that I kind of want to do it for the whole article, but I did a little experiment where I subbed out Heaven's Gate for TTSA, Marshall Applewhite for Tom DeLonge, and a section for disclosure. And this stuff reads like cult, like the ramblings of someone involved in a cult. They're apologizing for what happened. They're saying, they're planning on doing this. They're waiting till the time is right for that. The reason that they said something was going to happen and didn't happen was because of this and that. There's a cultish underpinning to a lot of these people. Chris isn't like that. Chris has more faith in TTSA than I do, but he understands that where I'm coming from is that I would love for something to come out of this. I haven't seen anything that really seems that substantial or ground shaking yet. And all we're getting done is being issued these false, or maybe not false, but these false promissory notes about what's going to happen. And I just haven't seen anything that has happened. So why should I believe that something's going to happen?
Yeah. So it's basically like when prophecy fails kind of situation.
Somebody on Twitter, I can't remember who it was, they read the thread and they're like, these people should really read When Prophecy Failed.
Yeah, I think it would serve them well.
Hey, Wren, while Josh was talking there, I ran Tom DeLonge through the secret cipher.
Oh my God.
Be half known.
Hey, that fits really well. Be half known.
Richard, we were talking a little bit before that we started the show. Do you have any thoughts on any of this? Kept up with some of this?
Well, I mean, I guess like everybody, I'm trying to fit it in to something that makes sense to me. If you just sort of strip away it's almost like what Josh was saying, like kind of strip away the UFO angle and just think about someone saying, I have information. It's going to change the world. I'm the gatekeeper to it. You can be a part of it, but you've got to get on board. Part of it sounds like religion. I'm curious about the money angle. Is this group looking for investors?
Yes.
Because there's a little bit of a sort of, get in on the ground floor, don't get left behind aspect to it that sounds like they're trying to raise money.
Yeah, they are. You can buy into it.
Well, yeah, it's
and they're going to build a spacecraft.
I'm sort of, my feeling is like if there is a truth to be revealed, it's going to get revealed, whether they're doing the revealing or not. So I'm happy to just kind of sit around and wait for something to happen. But the thing is, so far, nothing has really happened. I'm not just talking about with them. I'm talking about with anybody. I mean, my argument is always, if there are, for instance, crashed discs, well, how is it that magically the government are the only people who have access to them? Wouldn't these things be like, if they're physical and they can crash, wouldn't they also be crashing in places where the forces of government were not the first to respond? I mean, ultimately, shouldn't there be some of this shit laying around, where anyone can get their hands on it? But no, somehow only the rich or the powerful or the government has access to these secrets, whereas everybody else experiences UFOs in this really deeply weird individual personal way that's more psychic than physical. Right. We seem to be talking about two entirely different things.
Yep.
If there are nuts and bolts, or if there are actual organic living creatures that physically inhabit space and can be here, that almost feels like even if that were revealed to be true, that would have nothing at all to do with most of what goes on in Jacques Vallée's books. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the reason why you're noticing that dichotomy, I think, is because it exists. And my sort of thoughts on the nuts and bolts angle is that is basically just an invention to be used like for purposes of perception management. I mean, if you've ever seen Mirage Men, I mean, how this was used basically to cover up for, actual secret weapons technology that was being developed. Because, UFO researchers were actually, observing real aircraft, that, experimental aircraft and stuff. And they knew that information would get out to foreign powers through these UFO books, and they needed to muddy the waters. So, and plus too, I mean, we can't ever forget that most of the Roswell narrative comes from Bill Moore, and Bill Moore was in the pocket of, OSI. Like, he was one of the people that they were feeding information to. Right. So, I was just going back and listening to the Conspirinormal episode today with Nick Redfern and thinking about his book Final Events, about how the, quote unquote crash at Roswell. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like there wasn't like a crash disc, right? Like it was basically like a bunch of debris.
There were two different sites, supposedly.
Okay.
This is how the story goes. And let's just
face crash at Corona thing that Stanton Friedman. Yeah.
You've got the field where Mac Brazel's field with all the stuff in it. And then supposedly, 50 miles away, there was this craft that the like an archaeologist or whatever, when his students stumbled across with 3 dead bodies. One was alive, or that's how the story goes. So that. But
this side with the bodies, was there like more of an intact vehicle crash there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's the story,
right?
Because the field of debris, like, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat that basically like what the Collins elite thought, that this was sort of like alchemical debris, and it was put there for a reason. Like,
you talk about the Jack Parsons and Babylon working and all that stuff, and
because
the homunculus.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I believe about a lot of this stuff. Like we were talking earlier about it, whether or not it's all just paranormal, or if there's a physical element, and I think it's kind of both. I think that it is paranormal in nature, but that it can basically manipulate things to such an extent that it can create, say, bodies, physical bodies, to muse in the real world and move around in, or, you know, a physical craft. But it's being sort of created on the fly as it needs to.
Well, this reminds me of something that Jacques Vallée obliquely told Red Pill Junkie. That was basically kind of getting at this sort of idea of like an impulsive alchemy that's sort of baked into the universe. Because I think it was one of those things where Red Pill came up with some sort of thing about saying, you know, would you say that perhaps there's some sort of impulsive alchemy in the universe? And Vallée said something like, you know, that's exactly along the lines of what I was thinking. So it didn't really elaborate on it, but, you know, this idea that there is some sort of alchemical creation of actual technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the impression that I got when I was reading Vallée's analysis of the metamaterials, and that, you know, here are actual physical materials that supposedly came off of craft, structured craft, like real physical craft. And what they found was that there wasn't anything unusual or rare about the elements or the metals or whatever. It was all, you know, common earthly materials. It's just that they had strange isotope ratios that weren't naturally occurring. So there was something odd about them almost. And, you know, my theory here is that these things are basically put together from raw materials on the fly as needed, and then dissolved back into the environment when, you know, they need to get rid of them.
So what you're saying is, just so I understand, because I might be a couple steps behind here, is that some sort of energy or intelligence sort of calls together the physical matter it needs in the moment. I mean, in a weird way, like almost like ectoplasm or weird apports or something, and then it is used or manipulated for whatever the purposes are at the moment, and then when that impulse or that task or whatever is done, there is some physical residue sometimes.
Yeah, because I mean, we definitely know that UFOs leave physical evidence. You know, you have these metamaterials supposedly, but you also have things like burn marks. They leave marks on the environment, and, you know, in some cases, I mean, they have weight to them and mass. So there's some sort of physicality there, and it's sort of I think. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
No, I was going to say I've definitely, you know, I've heard a lot about the burn marks and stuff like that that seem to indicate an energy of some sort was there, whether it's, I mean, the degree to which it's physical, I guess you could argue. But then, I mean, it is funny how this all comes down to, I mean, I think what we were almost talking about before we started, which is paranormal Bigfoot, but also poltergeists and all kinds of things, sort of the invisible and non-material acting with intention upon I mean, that's what a poltergeist is. It is something non-physical acting upon the physical. And so I guess these are just ranges of degree.
Yeah. And the Bigfoot thing is what I was about to just bring up, that cryptids, in particular Bigfoot, exhibit both properties of like physical creatures in that they can affect the physical environment around them. They can make noise. They leave footprints. But then again, too, they also exhibit paranormal attributes, like being able to just vanish into thin air.
So, Josh.
Yes.
Rumor has it that you are reading Rebirth of Pan right now.
Yeah, I'm not too far deep into it, but yeah, it's I put the call
all
out.
of this is coalescing around exactly what we're talking about. Both the cryptids and this cosmic alchemy creating physical
Did
objects.
he talk about that in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because you know, if you read a lot of that book now, some of it in terms of what people have been saying feels a little bit more quaint.
Yeah, and we discussed that. We really got into that on this episode coming up. But it's
Nice.
exactly kind of the stuff we're talking about.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like with the benefit of however many decades there have been between now and that book, it's like, oh yeah, of course, this is what. But for 76 or something like that, or maybe it was later than that.
We didn't catch that. What did you say? Did you ask when the book came out?
Yeah, I was trying to remember when the book came out.
It's 83 or 4, I think.
Okay, so not quite 76, but for somebody to have had a lot of these ideas back in the early 80s,
yeah, I
mean, holy cow, that's some real insight. I think that it goes off the rails towards the end.
Yeah, there's a lot I had a problem with, but it was just really fascinating how much it influenced all these ideas.
But there's a lot of it that he was definitely ahead of his time in the way that he thought about a lot of it.
Do you want to give a little bit of background on it and how it influenced these ideas, like exactly these things we're talking about right now? Just a quick synopsis.
Well, yes. I mean, so the quickest way to put it is that Brandon had an idea that a lot of these manifestations that we find are the result of some sort of greater sort of Gaian earth force that's trying its best to communicate with human beings. And that's the reason that you see a lot of symbolism in the paranormal, is because it's trying to convey ideas through symbolism. And he actually sort of went to the extent of saying that anomalous artifacts or artifacts that have discrepancies that normally lead people to think that they're hoaxes are actually sort of generated spontaneously by this force and deliberately buried in the ground to be discovered as part of a way of trying to communicate these messages, which is sort of, like you said, it's very much like this sort of spontaneous alchemy idea.
Well, what was that our favorite quote from that Barry book about the foot not being formed all the way?
Yeah, it was a zoologist from the Baltimore Zoo who said it's almost like some of these three-toed Bigfoot tracks. It's almost like they forgot to finish the feet, or it's like they were just sort of hastily cobbling together the feet as sort of an afterthought. And if you look at these three-toed footprints, I mean, that's absolutely what they look like. They look like a real half-assed version of a Bigfoot print.
They look goofy, yeah.
Weird.
Really that weird. Even sort of syncs with James Merrill's Changing Lighted Sandover, because in that it's Merrill is talking to one of the spirits in the Ouija board, and he asked him about the flying saucers because it was topical when Merrill was writing the poem, and one of the spirits says, "We don't know what the flying saucers are. They seem to be from the earth. They're sort of like bees." Like packets of living information. It's, yeah, I mean,
wow.
That's sort of what I tend to think of when you said that about this being some sort of earth energy attempting to communicate.
And everything falls silent. Richard, aren't you, so you're in Pasadena, so you're like, in Jack Parsons' old stomping grounds, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm just about a mile away from Orange Grove, which is the street where he and L. Ron Hubbard and all the other 1950s, cool, crazy, eccentric people used to hang out. In fact, Parsons is still a big building. I mean, right off the route of the Rose Parade, there's a big, Parsons building. So I see his name every day. He's very much a presence here.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an engineering firm. So it's just like, it's like seeing, Northrop or something, or Lockheed.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about Orfeo Angelucci, if we could, because this is one
another local boy.
Yeah, this is one that intrigues me, and I kind of reading through some of Greg Bishop and Adam Gorightly's book, The A for Adamski, and I really felt like Angelucci was one of those guys that he was a contactee, but I felt like he actually was willing to admit that there was a sense of unreality to it, that it wasn't all the nuts and bolts. It was much more spiritual in nature for him.
Yeah, well, if you read that book, his first one, it starts out sort of sounding and feeling like a one of the more, I want to say, classic UFO narratives where a guy comes down and he's got a science fiction name and he rides in a spaceship and he takes Orfeo on board and they travel throughout the galaxy and see other worlds. But the further it goes, the more almost Christian diction and iconography and symbology sort of comes into it, and it almost begins to feel like a religious tract. And of course, a hallmark of the contactees was sort of also felt very Christian in that it was, here's a warning and we come to you benevolently from the sky, but we come with a warning to change your behavior. And it was, so his tale, and then the one that followed in the second book, I think it's Son of the Sun. It sort of lives in that world, but apparently what set him apart from the other contactees was he never really came up with anything physical. There were no photographs. He didn't try to provide a lot of physical proof. He just told his story, and if you believed it, great, and if not, that was cool. Yeah, but it is strange when you live right near where this stuff took place, because again, that's something that I drive past all the time, and I drive underneath the bridge where these contacts took place, and the bridge now spans a freeway. And every time I drive by, I kind of look at it and go, "Wow, there's where old Orfeo, had his weird midnight encounters." So it's odd. It's hard to know what to make of it. And it's even harder to know what to make of the fact that so many of these contactees were in the same decade, in the same few years, in the same geographical spot. Were they copying each other, or were they influenced by each other, or was something else going on? I don't know.
Yeah, the Christian element of that is exactly what I was talking to somebody on Twitter about this weekend, about how, because we were talking about Indrid Cold and about how, one of the first things Indrid Cold says to Woodrow Derenberger is like, "Don't be afraid." And
be not afraid.
Yeah, be not afraid. You go back to the Bible, and that's exactly what angels always said when they would first appear, because they were always terrifying. And if you even read the descriptions of the angels, it's like, basically a guy comes down out of the sky in a giant beam of light and says, "Don't be scared. I've got all these messages for you, and I want you to go and tell everyone the good news." And it's like, it's exactly the same as like most contactee narratives. And even down to the Christian elements, because in Indrid Cold's case, he was Christian, and he told Woodrow Derenberger that all the people from Lanulos were Christians as well.
Which did you know that?
So great.
Did you know that Indrid Cold died recently?
Oh yeah, I saw that Aaron Goulias posted.
No. What is this I'm hearing? I never even got invited to the funeral.
So Derenberger's daughter continues it on, apparently, and she posted on Facebook or Twitter, it's Facebook, back in September. She said, she posted, "This just in. I just received 2 visitors carrying some devastating news. Indrid Cold, age 92, Demo Hassan, and Carl Ardo died today. When I have more info, I will pass it along." And apparently there was never any more info.
Yeah, I mean,
what more info is there going to be? He's dead.
He's going to come back with the Space Brothers.
Yeah, I mean, according to what Goulias said, like, Indrid Cold gets this sort of folk pop culture kind of representation now as an almost like sinister entity, which, thanks, Richard. That's probably largely in part the fault of your movie that you wrote.
You're welcome.
And but in reality, he was pretty much like a benevolent, almost like angelic figure. He was apparently like a very close family friend. You know, he would come over all the time and hang out with Woodrow Derenberger and his daughter, and you know, apparently remained a family friend, at least according to Woodrow Derenberger's daughter. He still visited her even after Woodrow died. So, I mean, who knows? But yeah, that was odd to see. Age 96. Like, I love that she knows his birthday.
I know. It really, every time you hear someone say that there is something about the phenomenon that is intentionally trying to confuse and mislead, that's what it always feels like. It is so strange, because I don't know that. I guess that Woodrow Derenberger always felt that there was a physical reality to this guy, but what possible, you know, it's very hard to share delusions or fantasies or hallucinations that are wholly created within the mind of a single person. So if his daughter is involved in this, is it a total lie? And if it is, to what possible purpose? And if it's not, is there some aspect of physical reality to it? Or is it more emotional? Is it just, hey, this is what my dad believed and people said he was wrong, and so I'm going to jump onto his narrative to defend him? And you can come up with a whole lot of family situations where that dynamic plays out.
Yeah. Well, there was apparently some physical reality to Injured Cold, because both Woodrow Derenberger's wife met him on multiple occasions. His daughter met him. So there was at least a person who Woodrow told them was injured cold and played the part. Now, I don't know if we'll never know the real truth behind that, but I feel like his wife wouldn't just, maybe she was just making the story up too, but I feel like there were people other than them that also saw, this character injured cold, like entering and leaving their house. So I don't know. I've often thought about that, about whether or not there was someone who was taking advantage of Woodrow Derenberger by pretending to be, this alien.
Right. It borders on the Men in Black, and sometimes, right. It's too late to find out, but I do wonder to what degree Whitley Strieber's wife, Anne, experienced his experiences. I know she was on board and was emotionally and professionally supportive of him, but I don't know. I don't know, unless I've missed it, unless you guys know. Did she ever report any sort of visual or tactile experience?
I don't think she ever saw the visitors, at least the way Whitley Strieber describes them. I think most of the corroboration on that comes from people who also stayed at the cabin, like people who Whitley Strieber knew, and his son. I know his son had some encounters with them.
Oh, really? That felt physical, not just psychic.
Yeah, one of the very first sort of stories in Communion, and the thing that scares Whitley really badly, is when his son says that there was, a large owl in his room the night before, like watching him while he slept.
Right. Yeah. Wow. And I guess that now has his son, has he come out in any public way and talked about anything?
I don't
know. I think I'll look that, or go ahead, Adam.
I don't think so. I don't think he ever has.
Yeah.
I think they kind of kept him.
I think I looked for that a couple years ago, and I don't think he really has come forward with anything.
Yeah. I don't think so. Tim, Josh, you guys got any thoughts on any of this? Tim, you've been quiet.
I'm too quiet. I'm a bit out of my depth with this stuff.
I've seen some Whitley Strieber blowback online in the past couple of weeks, and
is this because of the Unknown Country, the Diana Pasolka interview?
Actually, before that.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a mainstream article comparing him to, saying that he was sort of the heir apparent to Stephen King, and then his
right.
Yeah. And just it's amazing to me how many people completely write him off. And my two things that I keep on coming back to are, number one, you'd have to be hard pressed to believe that he doesn't believe what happened to him. Because he literally threw his, I mean, unless he was so out of ideas that he decided it was more lucrative to throw his career away. Because, you know, even as sort of a narrative that has internal logic, communion isn't that. So that's the one thing that I come back to. And the other thing I keep on coming back to is Jeffrey Kripal is a lot smarter than I am. And Jeffrey Kripal seems to find value in Whitley's thinking and Whitley's work as well. So I just wish that, you know, there'd be some more nuance in the discussion.
Well, Whitley's a fascinating character too, but and not even because of the communion stuff or the visitor stuff. Like, he has had some strange things happen to him during his life that he doesn't really talk a whole lot about, but has dropped little hints here and there. Like his
you're right.
His involvement with the Process Church, his sort of missing summer that he went through when he was in Europe. Yeah. Why he was over in Europe in the first place, that whole thing is kind of weird. Like, he's never really been fully clear. He was also he was a follower of Gurdjieff, so he has sort of a relationship with the occult. I don't know if I would call him an occultist, but definitely it's tangential to it.
Yeah, he was really into the transcendental meditation. I remember reading that in communion.
Yeah, and Gurdjieff goes beyond that a little bit, but right. And then you have the stuff that might have happened to him when he was a kid, because he talks about maybe he may have been subjected to experiments in traumatizing children in order to bring out latent psi-like capabilities. And he's not the only person that has reported that sort of thing being done to them as a child. So that narrative isn't wholly just something he said. I've heard that other places, and he was in the right kind of time and place for that type of activity to have occurred.
Yeah, he strongly implies that in the book that he and Kripal wrote, The Supernatural. Mm-hmm. And it didn't really jump out at me until the second time I read it, but he does, because he's he's a really good writer, but he tends not to. So sometimes he doesn't get really specific.
Yeah.
He sort of, implies things, and I'm not quite sure why that is, because it doesn't necessarily, make him sound more credible, or it doesn't feed that thing in a reader where you want him to go, on this date at this time, this thing happened to me, God damn it, and I stand by it. Certain things he does, but others he's more circumspect about. And that was one of them, that he was, literally like put in a Skinner box, and subjected to, just what you said, these strange experiments that either that affected him one way or another, either provoked something in him that resulted in his ability to be more open to a spectrum of information of which these visitors are a part, or it drove him nuts.
Yeah, I think it's probably the former rather than the latter, because this is something that Jason Horsley has talked a lot about, but the idea that trauma is a sort of gateway into these type of encounters and experiences. We were talking at the beginning of the conversation about how drugs can also be a gateway into this, but trauma's another way. So be that trauma in the form of like near-death experiences, or just, childhood abuse. A lot of kids who suffer abuse as a kid end up having like sleep paralysis or out-of-body experiences. Yeah. You have the whole Kenneth Ring like encounter-prone personality thing.
Right. But that's tough, because drugs and trauma are gateways to a lot of things, including psychological states that are post-trauma.
Yeah, you're totally right.
It's tough. I mean, and in no way am I dismissing it. I'm just saying that unfortunately, these things are so close, that these two parallel lines are so close to each other, that it almost obscures rather than clarifies the truth.
Let's switch gears a little bit, and let's get into a topic that Tim has been talking about, which I think, Richard, you'll find this kind of interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this, but the phenomenon of Flannel Man.
What?
So we have a newbie to this, Tim.
Well, it is mentioned in Mothman Prophecies, the book.
Wait, what is it called? Flannel Man?
Not by that name. Not by that name. Keel talks about it as I don't know if he calls it bedroom invader in a checkered shirt. I don't know what the particular verbiage he uses. He does not say Flannel Man.
Yeah,
Flannel Man is something I actually picked up.
I love it. All right.
But nevertheless, these entities were appearing to people. Keel kept a whole file on them called checkered shirts or something. Someone got me that information recently. But I brought it up on the podcast very early on my podcast, Strange Familiars, because my wife had woken up and seen this. I say Flannel Man as if it's one. They're different things that are all wearing flannel shirts or checkered. They tend to be wearing red checkered shirts, although some different colors. And I talked about it, and things just went nuts. I get constant influx of Flannel Man witnesses. People telling me I never knew anybody else saw this.
Oh my God! I don't remember it from Mothman Prophecies, but again, that thing is chock full. So so now what and what is the to tell me sort of the archetypal Flannel Man encounter?
Usually, most often, someone will wake up. They are sure they're not in sleep paralysis. They're moving around. Often they will go leave their bed and get a cup of water or something, but not always. And they will see a man, usually in their house. He's dressed like a lumberjack. Usually it's a red checkered shirt. Sometimes a beard, sometimes no beard. They describe the look different. Color of the hair differs. Sometimes they describe him as short and stocky. A lot of people say it's like really tall, like up to 7 feet tall, kind of big guy like that. But that tends to be the prototypical one. Although I'm getting some different ones now where people are seeing him outside and so forth. But that's by far the most common one.
Is it considered like malevolent or friendly?
So
what
most
feeling
people
is associated?
Most people are shocked because someone's there who shouldn't be there. But
yeah,
they said generally it's pretty neutral. There are a couple people who were like, now my wife screamed, but she said she screamed just because there was a dude there who shouldn't be there. She said he looked like caught, like shocked that she could see him or something like that. And that's what a lot of people describe. Like he looks like, oh, you can see me kind of thing. I've talked to witnesses who have touched him or been touched by him. I interviewed a woman yesterday who pulled his beard. And so it's a very physical thing when it's physical, but then it's wow.
I got to tell you, I don't know that I've ever heard of this or it ever kind of, registered, but this is really strange. And I'm trying to figure out the significance of the checkered or plaid shirt. Like what does that even sound like? Like, I don't even know if this is, I've
gone through so at first I thought this is some archetype of the American experience or something that, the working, manifest destiny, lumberjack, Paul Bunyan, archetype.
Right.
Thing. Right. And then I moved, I kind of moved to maybe this is some sort of, just a watcher of some sort. Why he chooses that outfit, I don't know. To now, and maybe it's just because I'm in the middle of, I'm up to my neck in wild man stuff with the book Josh and I are writing. But now I feel like he's a wild man, but he's like the in between. He's not, as wild as the Bigfoot wild man, but he's this, lumberjacks work in the woods. They're they work with trees. They're this sort of in between, bridge between us and the real wild man, which is Bigfoot.
And Paul Bunyan was a giant, so
There you go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but are these international? Are they? Do they span history going back even further that you know of so far, or we don't know yet?
The oldest I found is an account from miners in Kentucky in the 40s who there was a mine collapse, and they said a portal or a doorway opened up in the side of the mine. A guy dressed in a red flannel shirt and jeans walked out, told them, "Don't worry, you'll all be rescued. It'll be okay." Walked back through the portal. It closed. They looked. They tried to find, where he went, and he just had disappeared. And they were rescued, and they didn't tell the story until like the 80s. In newspaper articles in the 80s, some of these miners started talking and telling this account. So that's kind of like the earliest one I think I found. There's a vague one, like a newspaper article about a ghost in Plaid or something, or Checkered. I forget what it says. That is a little earlier than that, but it's it's hard to tell if it counts or not.
Tim, do you remember
this is fantastic. This is my new favorite thing. I got to hear more about this dude.
Tim, do you know which year 1940s? Like, because the 1940s are a very important decade. So
I want to say early, but I mean, without digging up the report.
Is it post Trinity test or pre Trinity test?
I can't even, honestly.
Flannel Man was a homunculus.
I mean, did any of you guys watch the third season of Twin Peaks?
No. I heard some people have been telling me it was okay. The mine explosion was December 26, 1945. It was the Belva mine disaster.
So
Pineville, Kentucky.
That's Trinity test was July. Well, where are you going with that, Wren? Where are you going with that?
Look, dude, I don't know. I've just been reading a lot of Kenneth Grant. I just watched the third season of Twin Peaks like a couple months ago. I mean, there's a part where like basically after the Trinity test in the new Twin Peaks, like these lumberjacks appear and start traveling along the countryside, like reciting this weird poem. It's just, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Wait. They're reciting a weird poem?
Yeah. Let me see.
This is in Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
The new one.
You guys not watch season 3 of Twin Peaks yet?
Yeah.
I've had people tell me this.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, I thought this was, I didn't.
Oh yeah. He's wearing flannel too.
All right.
Yeah. What is the poem? This is the water and this is the well. Drink full and descend. The horse is the white of the eyes and dark within.
Okay.
Do you have an occult interpretation of that?
I don't know, man. This stuff is getting really twisty because, like, all of the Twin Peaks stuff, is all basically Kenneth Grant fan fiction, right? It's because Mark Frost read like the Typhonian trilogies and said this would be like a great backdrop for a TV show.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but almost every aspect of the Twin Peaks like mythology is literally like whole cloth from Kenneth Grant's writings. And it's even more clear in season 3 because it's like, I mean, there's like direct callbacks like to the Mauve Zone and to the stuff about how Kenneth Grant had this theory that the Trinity test was what unleashed like, the UFOs and all of these other weird entities into the world because it ripped a hole in reality. And I don't know. It's odd because, obviously Twin Peaks is like a fictional thing, but sort of the ideas it was working with weren't entirely fictional. It was like stuff that Kenneth Grant had been writing about and stuff that he sincerely believed was true. But then again, too, it's Kenneth Grant. So Kenneth Grant believed a lot of things. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that.
I'll tell you, the Flannel Man reports are getting freakier and freakier, including Flannel Man witnesses. Guy who listens to my show said some symbols appeared to him that were black on black, and they scrolled. He said the symbols were blacker than the black background, and he sketched them out for me. This is before he saw a Flannel Man type entity, and they were symbols that I had drawn and never shown anyone. They were protection symbols, sigils I had made, and he's almost certain that's what he saw. were these sigils I had made, a year beforehand and never shown anyone. They were for personal use. And then I have another woman who's a repeat. She's one of the few people who sees this thing repeatedly. She often gets precognitive dreams when, shortly after seeing this entity or sometimes in the same night as seeing him. And she predicted a shooting in Kentucky with some pretty scary accuracy.
What?
So, and this is associated with the flannel guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just so weird.
Damn.
Elaborate a little bit on Flannel Man being this in between figure to the real wild man, like you said, to Bigfoot. Like he's a step.
It's hard for me not to see the wild man archetype as being super important, just because Josh and I are up to our ears in this now. It's where we're living. And I just started thinking as all these different things are wild man. Odin was a wild man. Yeah. Santa Claus is a wild man. Absolutely. Without a
Satyrs, Pan.
Yeah.
The Satan. It's crazy.
Do you think this becomes more important because we are seemingly becoming further from nature? That this is like something pulling us back or reminding us?
Well, one of the things Josh and I talk about is in the book is that the archetype of the wild man has changed over time. And if you look at the reports, the Bigfoot reports in my books, which are from the 1800s, often it's like they'll describe him as a man, a hairy man, sometimes even wearing, clothes. And sometimes even carrying like a non-functional musket, but otherwise, 8 foot tall and covered in hair. And it's they're a lot more man-like. And then it seems like my feeling is that the further we get away from nature, the wilder our wild man becomes.
Well, that and the fact that, if you look at the way that the UFO phenomena tends to recontextualize itself, becoming more sophisticated, staying a step ahead of us and becoming more sophisticated from, Magonian balloons to airships to flying saucers to black triangles to et cetera, et cetera. It's almost like the wild man archetype is doing this in reverse. It's going from being more sophisticated, If you look at the medieval wild man basically being an omnipotent fairy or sort of someone who knows the ways of the world to this sort of it's a feralized human being to now, it's just a monkey. It's almost like it's sort of there's sort of these the UFO and the wild man archetype are passing each other in the night, going in different ways in the spectrum.
Damn. Mind blown, guys. Wow.
I have a headache right now.
Hey, I had a question for Josh real quick because I haven't even thought to ask you this. Is there any sort of fairy parallel with the Flannel Man stuff? Like the idea of like a woodsman figure?
Fairies wear flannel, you got to believe me.
I would say so in that sort of, woad-woes sort of thing, sort of tied into the wild man archetype. I think that's really sort of the linchpin between fairy folk and Flannel Man. As far as like a direct analog, unless you want to go dwarven with beards and mining implements or something, that's about it. I have not found anything that off the top of my head that really makes a correspondence there. I've even looked into, have you found any sort of archetypal significance to the tartan pattern? Because I've looked into that briefly, Tim, and I didn't find anything that really seems to have any sort of significance there. Obviously tartan is a Scottish sort of thing. So that has, a place robust fairy lore, but.
Yeah. Nothing that's jumped out and, hit me over the head as aha or, It's whatever, the paranormal tailor got a deal on a bolt of red flannel fabric at some point, I think.
I will say that the woodsman as an archetype sort of occupies a similar role, I would say, Tim, and we haven't really talked about this, so I'm spitballing here, but a similar role to like the blacksmith in a lot of these fairy tales. The woodsman rescuing the damsel in distress, the woodsman sort of being a stand-in for a hero character, just like the blacksmith would be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is hard to find a character in mythology that immediately brings to mind plaid or tartan. I mean, again, I did think of Santa Claus, but I don't know if early versions of St. Nicholas were, or whatever, the spirit of Santa Claus was supposed to be is associated with plaid. But I'm searching my brain. This is a head scratcher.
Oh yeah, it's part of my life now.
Well, Santa Claus is sort of drawn out of that sort of Green Man foliate motif, which has links to Odin, as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But the compelling thing about Santa Claus is that, what does Santa Claus do? Well, he cavorts with elves and he runs around your roof and he, comes in through your chimney without opening your doors and does a lot of things that we associate with. Yeah.
Well,
as far as
associate with what? Well, yeah, I was going to say, but you invite him in though. You invite him in by leaving gifts and offerings, hanging a stocking. I mean, there is. Yeah, you're right. It's this. It connects up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah. As far as, I don't know. I mean, there's a certain sort of brand of wrapping paper that definitely has sort of a tartan motif, Tim.
Yeah. Well, it's a stretch, but I was thinking about like just going to its most basic, just essence of intersecting horizontal and vertical lines and checkered. And that has, that's where the cross is from. That's where the checkered floor of the Masonic Lodge is. I mean, real stretch, but, and that's got the Scottish roots too. So,
no, I mean, if you boiled it down, I think there'll probably be that's a pretty prescient observation, actually.
We just tied the Masons into Bigfoot Flannel Men. That's a conspirinormal first. Josh and Tim, anything in your book that you guys are working on that you have found that is surprising you, that is new to you? I mean, with
all along the way. I mean, I think Josh and I keep just, first of all, we're sharing our research back and forth. And I mean, there's some things, I don't know how much we want to give away before we actually get the book out. What do you think, Josh?
Whatever you're comfortable with, guys. I know.
Well, I guess I'll say, so to sort of give a sort of a little bit of a background on this book, what's the way that you suggested that we put it, Tim, so that we don't sound like dicks comparing ourselves to the way? I think what this book, I hope that this book can be a moment for the Bigfoot community. I'm not comparing either Tim nor I to being the sort of thinker or writer that Valet was, but I'm hoping that this book will be sort of the Bigfoot community's passport to Magonia moment, in the sense that it says there's a vast amount of folklore that corresponds to a lot of these things that you're saying. It's not explicative. It doesn't say what this is, but there's a vast amount of folklore that the community has sort of been ignoring because they've had this particular pet idea, and really it's just completely baked into worldwide culture. One of the things that I find fascinating, and this is just a small example, this idea that footprints, for example, in fairy lore, were sometimes deliberately they were designed to deliberately confuse people who tried to track down the fairies, to the point that some fairies had their feet on backwards, or they would have the ability to turn their feet around. You'll find that in the New World and in the Old World. Of course, you can argue that a lot of the New World fairy stuff, especially in like Latin America and the Caribbean, are Old World imports. But I've found similar folk tales of I believe it's the Ibugogo from island Southeast Asia, that has supposedly backwards feet, yetis that have their heels facing forwards. some Australian Aboriginal lore about, the Yahoos, not Yahoos and not Yowies, but Yahoos, large cannibal giants that have the ability to turn their feet around to confound people. And that's sort of thing that I always find really interesting, is this cross-cultural consistency and cross-cultural similarity between a lot of these different things across oceans, which I think it implies some sort of objective reality to these things.
And we've made, and I think I brought up this point on Conspirinormal before about how the Bigfoot community is in love with Native American mythology, and they love to point to all these different names that Native Americans had for the creature, and that's great. I mean, I think we should absolutely honor those traditions and try to learn from them. But as soon as those traditions say that the creature, dissolves and goes to another, a spiritual place, well, then it's out the window. They're happy to use the name for it, but when the myth involves it, being a completely spiritual or supernatural creature, that goes out the window. It's like, no, it's just, then it's almost like, that part doesn't count, which is rather offensive on some level. But if you look at the tradition of wild men all over the world, you don't have to dig very far to find a European tradition of wild men. We had that before we came over to the New World. And almost universally in that tradition, it wasn't a natural creature. It's never been seen as a natural creature. It's been supernatural across the board. It's a rarity that people talk about him as some kind of natural creature.
Right. So you've got sort of a variation on, I would argue, sort of the ancient aliens trope. Well, these people were superstitious. They thought that these were some sort of spirit beings, but they were actually describing aliens because they were, so primitive they didn't know what they were talking about. You can't paint indigenous cultures as being a monolith, but I think that sometimes if indigenous people say that these things can turn invisible at will, then don't say, oh no, they're just really good at hiding. Like, these people had tens of thousands, if not, as we continue pushing the time scale back even longer to really sort of get to know their environment just as well as some sort of Bigfoot that somehow knows how to camouflage itself to appear like a tree stump or some of this other ridiculous stuff that people say. And what's really been interesting
are they cover their own tracks? They walk backwards and all that. Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. They tiptoe backwards through their own tracks. It's completely bizarre thinking, honestly.
So the book covers a bunch of different topics, but obviously, Bigfoot, where Bigfoot intersects with that sort of alien fairy angle, which has never really been done, over the course of 20,000 words before. Bigfoot and altered states of consciousness, Bigfoot and ghosts, Bigfoot anomalous, Bigfoot tracks, anomalous Bigfoot track ways, Bigfoot's ability to mimic and in some cases shapeshift, the similarities between Bigfoot and poltergeist encounters, and Bigfoot and witches, which is something that I never really thought I'd find. Tim made a discovery. I'd have to say that consistently Tim's connection of women in white to Bigfoot encounters is something that just completely baffles me. And I keep on coming back to it because he told me that, every time you have these, not every time, but oftentimes you'll have these cryptid encounters and there'll be a woman in white associated with it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never heard this, never seen any corroboration. And he's completely changed my mind on it. Like there's something there. It's not a hard and fast rule, but there's some sort of connection there, which I think is sort of maybe tangentially tied to witches and fairies as well.
Wait, so what is this? This is because the woman in white and they're seen at the same time, or what's the connection here?
Often, not always seen at the same time. Often there will be women in white, like specter legends in the same place that Bigfoot sightings pop up. And sometimes they're connected. The women in white will somehow be connected to them in the sense that they're seen as the feminine opposite, depending on the mythology. Sometimes they're the feminine opposite.
Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And
wow.
Sometimes they say they lead them, like either literally or figuratively. They're leading these creatures. The information's there. I've dug it.
Wow.
And even when Josh was like, I don't know, I was like, well, I keep running into it, so I'm going to dig into it. And then by the time I was done the historical end of the research, I was like, oh yeah, there's real meat here.
Then you
Oh
have
my
the,
God,
to the
that's
point
so
that
great.
the thing that we have found consistently baffling was this old English phrase. How does it go, Tim?
Oh, well, there's so many different variants of it. What is it? Oh my goodness! It'll be easier for me to just open up the document. Them that dies maids lead apes in hell, or variants thereof.
How does it go again? Repeat that.
So let me get the actual. The Thomas Campion quote is probably the best one.
Putting you on the spot here. Sorry about that.
How old is this, Tim? What was this date?
Oh, this
from?
goes back to the Renaissance.
Okay.
Okay, so this is from a Thomas Campion song. So it would have been a lute song from the Elizabethan time. So they that yet have not fed on delights amorous, she vows that they shall lead apes in avernus. And she, in this sense, would be Proserpina, she was in the Renaissance the queen of the fairies. So we have this fairy connection. But basically it's saying that maids or women in white, as that is the virginal color, shall lead apes in hell. And this has been an incredible connection that has, woven its way through this whole idea of the women in white. And
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
it really is.
what about the
Wow, that is amazing.
what
That's
about
so
the
great.
supposed attraction to menstrual blood? Like Bigfoot's attraction to it.
Yeah, Tim and I have talked about that. I don't know if he's going to incorporate some of that, but that's something that Brandon talks about in Rebirth of Pan.
Yeah, that's what.
And again, the idea that if Bigfoot are attracted by menses, well, people who, ladies who were having their period are not pregnant, and obviously, the people who can most consistently have uninterrupted periods are probably maids, probably virgins. So it's sort of it seems part and parcel of that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like it's tied in, and I mean, I've going on several local investigations, Bigfoot investigations, which have women in white connections. I mean, it's really, really bizarre to the point where I kind of ask that now.
Any trailer parks?
No.
Not a lot of women in white in the trailer.
Well, do you know what I'm talking about, Josh? Also from Rebirth of Pan.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah.
And now
that's.
Now you guys have rendered Wren silent. I don't.
No, I was just about to ask about you. You mentioned Proserpina, right? As the ruling the apes in hell thing. I mean, that she's basically like a combination of another like Roman goddess and Persephone from Greek myth.
Right.
And like one thing that I've been getting into recently is that when the Greeks would do necromantic rituals, one of the gods you would petition would be Persephone, specifically Persephone and Hades. But you have that connection to not only the fairy stuff with Proserpina, but also a connection to the dead with Persephone.
Lots of people think that the Persephone myth is where the food taboo comes from. The don't eat food in fairyland thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it made me think about your whole the thing that you said, Josh, about this all being sort of one big ghost story.
Yeah.
I'm there. I mean, it's like I've said before. If the alien contact experience as we currently know it is practically indistinguishable from fairy lore, and I'd argue that, I mean, if you're not saying that there are some significant similarities there, you're not paying attention. Mm-hmm. And if fairies in, a lot of worldwide culture, but particularly, Western Europe, cavorted with the dead, where does that leave us? Like,
or possibly are the dead themselves.
Or possibly are the dead, yeah. Where does that leave us, vis-a-vis the fact that Bigfoot are often seen with these things too, and that that you have people like Anne Strieber telling Whitley, Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death. I mean, I kind of think that, like you said, I said, I feel like sometimes we're just dealing with a giant ghost story that is full of a cast of characters that are not only the restless dead and all of us who have gone before us, but also these sort of psychopomps and these sort of stagehands that are ushering things on and off stage, as it were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have a lot of the early church fathers, specifically Augustine, Augustine, saying that demons and pagan gods literally were like basically the heroic dead, or human kings that had died and had been sort of undergone apotheosis upon death by the people who used to follow them. And so you have this sort of growth of pagan culture from ancestor worship. And
that's that's sort of a thorny thing too. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, because on one hand, that sort of it sort of denies the agency of the maybe external reality of these entities. But on the other hand, it does bring up an interesting point. Like if the human dead stick around for whatever reason, how long does it take before you're not really human anymore? Like how long do you have to live before you start being something other than human?
No, that's an excellent point. And, I also think that a lot of people who want to point in one direction or the other through these things really dismiss human beings' ability to syncretize.
Yeah.
Because there is significant evidence for the fact that somebody, a great warrior chieftain buried at a particular spring sort of became the genus loci of that space. But it's also tied into older stuff too. And I think it's like Santa Claus. It's like Easter. It's like a lot of these things. We as human beings try to streamline a lot of these beliefs into one sort of, we like I said, we syncretize.
Yeah.
So another thing.
Go ahead, Tim.
Another thing we're finding, which, not Josh and I are going to be loved and hated, I think, when this book comes out. But another thing we're finding is a lot of these hallmark Bigfoot cases that have been reported over the years have a distinct weird quality that has just been absolutely ignored when you go back to when you find alternate documentation other than just the reports that we've been given for 40
I go so far as to say suppressed, actually.
Yeah. I mean, you were telling me about the Ape Canyon stuff, Tim, which I'd never heard before because I'd only heard the modified version.
Ape Canyon is a bizarro catalog of paranormal weirdness that completely goes ignored. You only hear about monkeys being shot.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Ape Canyon story, Richard?
No. What is this?
So the basic story, I'll let Tim do the cool version of the story. I'll do the boring version. The boring version is that a bunch of were they miners, Tim?
Yeah, they were
prospectors. Yeah,
so they were all older than 18.
Breaking out the dad joke. I'm proud of you, new dad.
Oh yeah.
So all these miners went up into the woods, basically saw these weird ape creatures, shot one, and then that night were basically besieged by these, hairy apes in the woods that threw rocks and tried to break into the cabin.
Yeah, this was like in the 20s, I think.
Yeah. Now, this is the story that you'll hear on, Bigfoot podcasts and popular culture, but Tim recently told me that story is actually in reality a lot stranger, and I'll let him handle that part.
Yeah, so one of the guys that was there wrote with his son, wrote the story down I believe in the 60s. So this is some years later. The Ape Canyon thing took place in 1924, like the supposed attack. But it basically starts with these miners see this vision of a giant Indian who tells them to follow a white arrow into the wilderness. They follow this.
A white arrow in the sky. A giant white arrow in the sky. Yeah.
Yeah. They follow this white arrow in the sky. Along the way, they meet another woman who happens to be named Vander White, a spirit woman, not a natural woman. She's a female spirit that was a comforting presence, they said. They follow this arrow to what becomes their gold mine, which they then name after this female spirit. They name it the Vander White Mine. They're there sometime, I think it's months before they ever actually see the creatures. They're hearing sounds, but they're hearing like machinery in the ground. And
by the way, Tim, did you point out Vander White?
I thought I did.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like the fact there was a lady named Vander White.
Right, exactly. Yeah, a white. She was essentially a white lady. They don't describe her appearance, but her name is Vander White. And they're hearing weird sounds. They're getting apports, or is it apports? They're getting anyway. They just all kinds of this menu of weirdness before they ever see a creature. They're finding single footprints in the middle of they said it was an acre wide field of like soft mud, and there was one single footprint in the middle of it. There, so it's like they literally described it as, something had to pick this thing up out of the sky and put it down there and pick it up again. That's the only way it could have left one footprint in the middle of this vast field of mud. So it's just one weird thing after another before they eventually end up seeing the creatures, and then then the attack happens. But that is the part that's cherry picked by all the Bigfoot books, just the shooting of the creature, the attack, and them leaving the following day.
Well, I didn't tell you, Tim, but I found a Rene DeHenden quote where he actually says, "I think Fred Beck just got a little weird in his old age." Oh, it's like, okay, that's completely intellectually honest. Good job. Good job.
Yeah. And then you found a separate account, Josh, right, where it said somebody went up there, found the cabin, and only found, was it left or right footprints?
They found a track of prints around the cabin, but it was only of the left, or like you said, left or right footprint. But it was all like a one-legged trackway. And you find some of these one-legged trackways. They're few and far between, but you find them as well.
What in the world? What in the world?
Yeah.
God.
So Fred Beck himself, the miner who wrote the article, and this is in the 60s, he's got this wonderful theory where he says, first of all, he says, no one's going to capture these things. You can go out and hunt them all you want. You're not going to be able to capture one. He said, we knew they were supernatural at the time. I'm telling you, they're supernatural now. And he said, there's something about them that, he said, not always, but often they need people to manifest. They need us to be there to actually, take physical form, which, whether he's right or wrong, that sounds a lot like the kind of ideas we're talking about today with things like co-creation.
Right. Exactly.
Have you guys, are you guys familiar with that documentary, Love and Saucers?
Oh God, his name. Shit. Greg Bishop is yelling at me somewhere.
It's David Huggins.
David Huggins, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a book associated that reprints almost all of his paintings called Love in an Alien Purgatory. But what you should know is that on page 14, there's a painting that this guy did because he painted all of his encounters with the various aliens that mostly look like traditional aliens, and one of them looks like an insect, but one of them is a creature that David refers to as Hairy Guy, and he's a really short Bigfoot coming out of the woods, and he is basically a familiar of this whole phenomenon. But he's short, but he's got thick, dark brown colored hair and large glowing eyes. So it's almost an exact cross between like a gray and Bigfoot.
Really? So the gray Bigfoot hybrid is hybrid sort of appearance. I'm not sure I've ever heard that. It's crazy.
Was he wearing flannel too?
Aware of that.
It's on page 14. There's a painting of it in the description, and I'm sure it recurs throughout the book. But yeah, if you check out a book called Love in an Alien Purgatory, you can see it.
Yeah.
That's the guy who says that he periodically would have sex with this alien woman. Is that the guy?
He lost his virginity to her.
Yeah. I've seen that documentary. It is absolutely fascinating.
It's really good. It's really well done. Yeah.
Well, Whitley Strieber comes straight out into the supernatural and says that, Gray taught him how to go down on a woman. So, these things happen.
And on that note, I think that's the place to end this section, guys. I was waiting for the perfect moment.
Bigfoot taught me how to be alone and sad.
Guys,
hey, listen, it's been such an honor to be on your final episode.
Let's go down the list here, guys. Tell everybody what you guys got going on next. So we'll start with you, Wren.
Okay. You can find me right at liminalroom.com. I also have some cool stuff if you want to play with Alan Greenfield's Secret Cipher, the Ufonauts. You should head on over to naeq.io. And I'm also on Twitter at Mr_APaul.
All right. Tim?
Oh.
They call him Tim?
They do. Strangefamiliars.com. That's my podcast, now weekly. And you can find lots of Flannel Man and Bigfoot and other kinds of crazy stuff there. And then my books are on Amazon. Look up Timothy Renner. My latest is Don't Look Behind You. First time I write about a lot of the weird stuff I've experienced on Bigfoot investigations and similar outings.
Mr. Cutchin?
JoshuaCutchin.com. Don't expect any blog posts for a while because I'm working on this book with Tim, which should be out sometime in late 2019. But it's we're both really excited about it, and all my other books are available through Amazon.
And Richard?
Well, I hang out with most or all of you guys on Twitter. I'm at Richard Hatem, so it's pretty easy to find. And during the day, I'm working on season 2 of Titans. So
nice.
If you've got a spare $7.99 a month to subscribe to DC Universe, you can see the live action version of all your favorite DC Titans characters going crazy.
All right, we're going to close this section out, and guys, we'll be back to close out the show at our 250th episode on Conspirinormal.
Wow.
Yeah, my brain is fried.
Epic.
Yeah. That was extremely epic. We won't belabor the point too much here, but we're just coming back just to say, because I think we did was like an hour and 45 minutes that we did with those guys.
Yeah.
And then we did 15 or 20 more minutes with them on Patreon. So we're going to have another Patreon episode to put up, which I'm very happy about, for sure. Almost didn't do it because we're about to lose Rob. He starts to silently fade away.
I'm good.
I'm all right.
Bye, guys. I swear.
It's okay. But we're glad that you're here, Rob.
Hell yeah,
for sure. And I think you're going to be with us a little more in the next few months. That's what we're hoping.
It's possible. Still seeing how everything pans out.
Things will pan out in the end.
Pan out.
Serfiel, you need any thoughts, man?
Oh, too many, man. I'm just
yeah. When you mentioned the Trinity test stuff, I was about to mention Downard, but I didn't really want to go down that rabbit hole.
I like how I cracked the esoteric symbolism of flannel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you made the real connection between Bigfoot and the Freemasons. that might be another like an addendum chapter in their book.
Yeah.
So yeah, we mentioned Patreon. Rob, you can tell them about it.
Yeah, if you want to support the show, we have a Patreon account. There's lots of bonus episodes, bonus content. We try to put stuff up there every month. Check it out. There's different tiers you can subscribe to. If you don't want to subscribe, you can do a one-time donation on our website. And if you don't want to spend money, but you want to support the show, best way to do that is just tell your friends. Go on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen, and give us a nice 5-star review, or just reach out to us through an email. You know, all that little bit of support, everything you do helps, and that's why we're here.
I'll be changing up some tiers on Patreon here pretty soon. We're still trying to kind of figure out what we're going to do, but I'm thinking possibly making it as low as $1 for people to get the access to the shows.
The bonus.
So I'm not quite sure exactly what we're going to do yet, but I'm thinking about keeping things kind of low.
Well, yeah, and we've been, we've flirted with a couple sponsors, that we're kind of kind of afraid to go any further with him. You might have heard it on the last show there, but
yeah,
really, we need your support on
right.
Patreon so we don't have to,
Yeah, we don't want to depend on those AI robots from the future.
Yeah, man.
But they're the only sponsors that we have right now, so we really do need that Patreon help. They may put something
the
into
Bigfoot
our
mafias
brain
approached
at
us
some
too,
point.
and we really don't want to censor ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. We got a couple other people that have expressed some interest. So I don't know. You may hear from them on the show as well. So
we want to keep the narrative free, here, but we got bills to pay.
Yeah,
so.
it's got to keep the lights on, man. And we
squirrels
got
out of the roof.
we got 2 studios we got to take care of. We got to keep the lights on. We should do a pledge drive, like a like a PBS pledge
PBS
drive.
call-a-thon.
Yeah,
Just gonna turn up the guilt on you guys. Sorry, but
yep. I mean, we need we need more like hot girls in the show or something. That's what we probably really need.
Yeah,
but, that's what everybody responds to. Feel like a Spuds McKenzie beer commercial from the 1980s.
All right.
On that point, guys, I'd like to thank Josh Cutchin, Timothy Renner, Richard Hatem, and Wren Collier, and you two guys.
250.
And the listeners that have helped us with encouragement to get us to episode 250. And about 50 more episodes, 300. And I'm hoping that's going to be a big event. But we will be back next week with a Romper Room episode that Serfiel and I have already recorded. So you will hear that. And then we'll have guests along. And be back next time on
Conspirinormal.